You can have less work as long as I don't have any work. So now I'll try to give a hand here. I think the real problem we're going to have is lack of time. We've got more information than can possibly within the time. So, um, do you remember offhand how much time we have?
I believe it is like a 45 minute one. It's like a
Okay.
full, it's in the actual conference, not OpenSSF day.
Okay. All right. That's actually good because even with that, we can easily overwhelm. So we'll have to be careful
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, and I'm hoping we actually get some actual developers join us that are curious to sign up and get themselves a badge. Is my dream.
Badge, work on their scorecards, all the good stuff.
Right. Yes. Hello, everybody. We will get started in just a few minutes. Marcus, how are you, sir?
Hi, busy as usual.
Ugh,
How are you?
doing very well. It's wonderful to see you.
Same here. Yeah, I saw a scorecard for one of my GitHub projects, but it was such a long form, I stopped in the middle of filling it out. So
Oh,
I need to pick it
well,
up again.
we know some people that can help.
It's us.
I put a link to our agenda in the Zoom chat. We have a couple items queued up for today, but if anyone has any new business they'd like to discuss, please put that under opens and then mark your attendance. We'll get started here in just a minute or two. I'm so glad we have this meeting right now because it gets me out of a crappy internal meeting I never want to go to. So thank you
Crow,
all.
how is it that my
You're welcome, Crow.
name and affiliation keeps reverting back to Dan Kaminsky Fellowship, even though I've updated it in? Is the template for the attendees coming in from something else?
The template comes in from the bottom of the document, and that might not have been updated. So while you update it every week, I rarely go back and retrofit the bottom template.
That's the problem. Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. Patches are always welcome.
Yeah, I'm doing it right now.
We'll get started in about 30 seconds. If you have any items you want to talk about today, on top of our action-packed agenda, with such industry luminaries as Dr. Wheeler and Luigi and Jonathan, it's going to be a great call. And if nothing else, it's 1,000 times better than the internal call I'm skipping out on.
This is recorded, Crow.
No.
That's all right. No one from my company watches this.
Too late.
And if they do, they should feel bad because their meeting's boring.
Well, the thing about Zoom is unless you have two laptops, you can't be in the two meetings at the same time. So,
Or a phone or tablet.
yeah, I know.
Who of us does not have like 5 laptops though?
Yeah, it's fair.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the April 19th edition of the Vulnerability Disclosures Working Group. As we do, I would love to ask one of our esteemed folks here, could you please help us take some notes? Do I have a volunteer?
Sorry?
Would someone like to help us take notes today?
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Luigi. Appreciate that. Do we have anyone new to the group that wanted to introduce themselves and say hello to everybody? We're friendly.
I'll say a quick intro. I'm Brian Russell. I've been in some of the other OpenSSF meetings. I work with Alpha Omega, and I work as a product manager at Google. Mainly here to talk about some of the vulnerability disclosure policies that Jonathan's going to go over. So thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. We're glad to have you. Anyone else?
Hi, Mike Scavetta. I can't remember the last time I was here, but yeah, I'm kind of Brian, but for Microsoft.
Welcome back.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, sorry, my audio is probably really bad. But yeah, I'm relatively new. I showed up for the first time last week and just still trying to get my bearings. Yeah. Andres, I'm a senior at NJIT.
Excellent. Well, welcome. We're very glad to have you. This is my favorite working group.
But it's
Anyone
not
else?
the best.
I didn't say it was the best, but I said this is my favorite.
The best working group is the best working group.
Exactly. Anyone else want to introduce themselves? All right. Well, thank you, friends. If you have any items you'd like to discuss today, please type them into the open section. Do we have any of our sub-projects here that wanted to give a brief update? If not, we have some notes below if you scroll down. But does anyone here want to talk about the awesomeness of their little project, maybe? All right. I would strongly encourage everyone, if you are able, we hold this call once a month during APAC time zone. So if you're in APAC or the West Coast of the States or South America, you have the opportunity to interact with our friends in Australia. And that's where the OSV crew lives out of. So if you're curious and talking about OSV, we'll be talking a lot more with those friends in the future. So I would put endorsement for that. Jonathan's AutoFix SIG has reoccurring meetings. I believe that's every other Thursday.
Wednesday at
every other Wednesday.
4 o'clock. We're gonna stick that for a little bit. I will be moving that meeting eventually because I start sailing in the summer at 5 o'clock on Wednesdays, and so I will be. But for right now, it is still 4 p.m. Eastern every other Wednesday. Yes, we're discussing scaling vulnerability fixing and bulk pull request generation for security vulnerabilities across open source.
Awesome. And then another one of our SIGs is OpenVex. We just recently adopted them. They meet every other Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern. So if you're curious about trying to find ways to share vulnerability information across the ecosystem, that's another great place you can participate. All right, let us start. Our esteemed member, Dr. David Wheeler, has something he would like to discuss with us. Take it away, sir.
Okay, so so I am mooting around the idea of having a Linux Foundation-wide vulnerability disclosure policy. This is, reporting vulnerabilities to a Linux Foundation project. Vast numbers do, but there's nothing that says on the top, hey, we, the LF, like vulnerability reporting. I mean, we do, but there's nothing we can point to. I did do a blog post earlier, but that talked a little bit about this. But a blog post, while it's it's an interesting, that's not something that people are going to be easily finding. So this is not a done deal within the LF, but I put in some stuff about the kinds of things I think it should say, and I just wanted to sound out some folks. Once I can get something to a more stable state, I want to share it, but basically the idea here is telling folks, hey, if you find a security vulnerability in some project, develop, sorry, by the way, for the background that decided to start just when I'm talking. You can see the text here. If you find a vulnerability in software developed by an LF foundation or project, please report it directly to that foundation or project using whatever they have. We'll link off to some. I mean, a number of folks already have such things. And if a project doesn't state how to report a vulnerability, report it to the foundation that contains the project, if there is one. If it doesn't make it clear, then ask them to change their process to make it obvious. And then I have some stuff about, hey, if they don't respond after some time, retransmit several times, and please give everybody a chance to fix them. And there was a question about how to handle things that are archived. Basically, there are projects which they're not being maintained anymore. They will not be maintained. We try to mark them as not being maintained, in which case, just go ahead and report to the public. And if nobody ever responds, we don't want to stick it forever. That's our fault. So, after some period of time, nobody responds, release. Finally, this is really appealed to projects and foundations. We ask that everybody to make it easy for reporters to report a vulnerability and be ready to receive the results. And this is where especially you guys come in because, oh, look, hey, there's some guidance that could help you do that. And, talking about security at your domain, a security.md file, and GitHub private reporting as things you might do.
Is the scope of this just LF open source, or is the scope of this LF open source and services that LF is running?
Anything. In fact, thank you for asking, because the next line is basically, hey, at one time there was a discussion about, hey, let's have a generic, if you don't know where else to report here. But then I'm realizing that that's great. That sounds great for the researcher. But then the next step is, oh, where does it go? We're not going to know better than the researcher, frankly. And so we do have a security@linuxfoundation.org email address, but we've decided to limit that only to the Linux Foundation infrastructure, things like DNS names, and the web and the main LF website, where we do need somebody for those, and those aren't actually part of any particular project or foundation or anything else. So scoping it that way. So for anything. But my expectation is that most reports are going to be about specific projects. We still actually have a constant problem of people sending to security@linuxfoundation.org vulnerability reports that should go to the Linux kernel, for example. So, making it a redirect will just probably make things worse. So, we're telling people, please don't do that. That's for this and not the other cases. We don't actually maintain a lot of infrastructure, by the way. If you're looking for the Linux Foundation data center, you'll be very disappointed.
I hope it's not under your desk.
Me too, because I'm outside. All that's under my desk is my feet.
That little Raspberry Pi stuck under a lot of papers, yeah.
Oh.
Now, I don't know if you're kidding, but we are the SKF folks here?
I don't see Glenn.
Yeah, they actually did have a large set of Raspberry Pis running a service for quite some time. So that is actually not a joke. And it does work, but it has downsides. Anyway,
David, do you have a one concern that I have is there a central repository of LF owned domains? Right, or IP ranges or something like that we can say this is in scope, or because if you're saying LF owned, right, especially when you're talking about public services running on the internet, if you can't define what that is, you can't give permission over it, or right, like a researcher, you can't say we provide protections against all LF owned things if the things that have the word Linux in them can be beyond the scope of that's does that make sense? I know I'm rambling, but am I making sense?
Yeah, I would go the other direction. We generally in general, although there are probably exceptions, most domains that host a website will say, hey, we're part of the Linux Foundation. And so you could determine it that way. I don't know of any way to get that list of domains. That's
not the ideal, especially when you're dealing with servers that may not have websites and stuff like that.
I'm going to go further. I know of no way to find the list of LF foundations and projects. There's a page on the Linux Foundation website which lists them. It's very incomplete. So Right now, my plan is to link to that, and we'll separately work on improving that page to try to be a complete list.
Right. The problem that I have is that if you're going to be, because I mean, you want to offer safe harbor for this list, right? Like basically, like we won't sue you, LF won't chase you with lawyers, yada yada yada, for this list. But you need to define what is in scope for that list that those protections exist for. And so if we can't do that, then we need to get the sub foundations to do that for us.
Well, actually, I don't know that we need to do the sub foundations. I think what we have to do is work with LF infrastructure. That's actually one of their main tasks is,
Right.
is keeping track of domain names. So I think probably what we'd have to do is we'd have to ask we could ask LFIT to create and maintain a list, but that's the only way I can think of doing that. And Krob.
So a few points. In the future, if our OSS CERT idea gets funded, that's something potentially that organization could help out and be that routing function, assist with that security at lf.org, potentially.
Right.
Help track down the maintainers. And then I wanted to note that this is not identical, but is somewhat related to our next conversation that Luigi's going to talk about, where he's talking about a similar concept for everything underneath the OpenSSF umbrella. So okay. I'd like to...
Actually, before you go, there is one other topic that Jonathan just hinted at real quick. Yeah. And that's going to be a big longer term. So Jonathan mentioned this whole safe harbor. We absolutely do want to make sure that it's okay for vulnerability researchers to report. I had sent an earlier draft of some safe harbor text, and LF Legal had an apoplexy and said no, because the way it's written basically gives a field day to attack the systems, and there are researchers who exploit that and basically say, I'm a nice researcher while intentionally attacking the systems. So we do want to give safe harbor to those who are trying to be helpful, but we do not want to give a safe harbor to those who are basically flying a false flag. So the text we're going to have to write is going to have to be a lot more subtle. I think I don't know exactly what that's going to be. I know what the goal is. I think it's achievable, but that's something that is a current discussion ongoing. We may come back and need your help, but that's going to have to be something that involves legal, not just a technical review.
Yeah. I wasn't transitioning off. I was about to ask the group what comments and thoughts they have.
Oh, sorry.
Specific to safe harbor, I know the lady that helped build disclose.io and has worked internationally around safe harbor legislation, Amit. So if you're interested, I could help include her in the conversation, because she has a lot of experience talking about safe harbor, and perhaps she has some language that the LF legal team might find agreeable.
I have had this fight with when I worked at Gradle. I had established the Gradle vulnerability disclosure policy, and I had a similar set of arguments about safe harbor wording. So I can communicate some of this stuff to a lawyer as well in a way that's cohesive. And I'm already employed by the LF, so my time is available.
Yeah.
So what does the group think about this idea? A lot of things tossed out, but what comments and feedback do we have? Do we think it has merit? Anyone interested in helping move the ball down the field, so to speak?
My thoughts are really on the other side, being a grumpy old open source developer, thinking about all these projects that you don't even have a proper list on. Are they prepared to receive this? I like Rob's idea of having an OSS intermediary there, because my experience is that it's easier to write these kind of text and publish for an open source project than to actually implement it and handle vulnerabilities in a proper way. But maybe that's something we have to sort out in the EDU group, Rob.
I think the short answer is that I think all the major projects, the bigger ones, are already doing this.
Yeah, the bigger ones, absolutely.
The bigger ones are absolutely already doing this. The smaller ones are not necessarily ready, but I think my view, frankly, is the goal is to get them ready. And simultaneous with this, although this is not your guys' problem, I intend to work with LF management to basically try to get all of projects ready for such things. And it doesn't have to be sophisticated. It can be as simple as, if it's a one-person project, turn on GitHub private reporting and, get ready if somebody reports something.
Yeah, but the problem I stumble into is a culture problem. I spent 10 years in the Asterisk open source project, and we were proud of every CVE we published and all the mitigation we did in the Asterisk project. But now I'm in other projects where there's some sort of culture we can't change, where a CVE is never reported. Fixes are committed in dirty commits. And yeah, but we have a security policy that's very proper.
All right.
So changing attitudes is hard. Writing text is easy. Sorry for being grumpy.
Yeah, I'm going to give you an answer that you may not like.
Mm-hmm.
What we care about is if a vulnerability is found, it's reported, and it's fixed. That's it. We don't actually care. I don't actually care if a CVE is reported. Now, I do care in a broad sense, but I don't plan to make that a requirement. The Linux kernel folks in particular believe that the CVE process is irredeemably broken, and they are not going to participate.
Saw what you did there.
I am not going to try to put. I am not trying to fix. I'm not trying to change their opinion. They all do agree that they want to receive vulnerability reports, and they want them as fixed as quickly as possible. And that's the goal. Whether or not a CVE is assigned, I'm going to leave that to the individual projects because people disagree on whether or not that is a worthy thing to do. But you know what? I'm going to, if they get found and fixed, that's the step forward.
And the fix is traceable. I think that's.
If they get found and fixed.
Okay.
Traceability is not a requirement. Now, you don't have to agree with me, but I am trying to get something globally agreed on. That's not going to be globally agreed on. I'll tell you straight up. So found and fixed.
Your approach is easier for everyone to agree on. So
right.
I understand you.
Yep.
So Luigi has his hand up, and I want to encourage anyone else, if you have thoughts or comments, raise your hand to get in queue. Luigi.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand the concern about the policy and the process that can be two different things. It can happen often, but at the same time, OpenSSF should be good enough, and we can start and we can see how the process works. And if we see that we can improve part of the process, we can definitely work on it. In addition, it is a good lesson for us, for the open source community, I guess. We can then learn something bright and share what we have learned. This can be definitely a good experiment. We want to do it currently. Honestly, I work on security policy and a security report and communication with the community of the researcher, more in general, over 3 years. So I think that we can do it. I know that sometimes we can have some conflict. They can happen, but nothing that's a good communication and some good improvement cannot fix. So I am not so concerned, even if I can understand why people say having a security policy and having a security process are two different things. I totally agree on that.
Thank you. Jonathan, then Kayla.
I just had a brain totally shut down. I'll come back to me.
Okay. I just wanted to kind of echo from the like running the Internet Bug Bounty, which is, you know, a bug bounty program that supports open source vulnerabilities that we run. One of the things, well, the main requirements that we have in place for projects that are enrolled is that they have an open channel for vulnerability reporting. So exactly like what we've been talking about, is that they, and then the main other aspect is that there is some type of public notification of a fix. So that, and we leave that pretty generic just from, you know, because the same topic of there are some projects that are very much against CVEs. And so we don't expect that. We also don't expect, you know, specific severity ratings that follow, you know, CVSS or anything like that, because there are also projects that are very much against that. So the requirements that we have in place is just that there is some form of security advisory by the project that says this is the vulnerability, this is the fix, it was a security issue, and that this is published in one way, shape, or form. For some projects, that's a blog post. For some projects, that's a CVE. It's a distro. It's one of those other aspects. So that's one of the things we ask for the open source projects that are enrolled in IBB, and that way we can reward those submissions, ensuring that the project has gone through their whole vulnerability lifecycle first. So it's you know, that's the base requirements that we ask for IBB. I don't think that's outside of, you know, something reasonable to ask in this case.
Yeah, if I can respond real quick, I actually agree that those are good ideas. I'm not sure I'm going to get that, to be honest. And I would rather get people, again, report problems, fix them. Now, you'll note that this guidance is going to encourages people to use the guidance from this group, the best practices badge work, for example. The best practices badge actually does require that. So, and of course, the guidance from this group recommends similar things. At this point, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get that either. And I'm much more concerned about getting the train on the rails, as it were. We can always try to add that later, but right now, what I'm concerned about primarily is the potentially very long delays between I heard there's a problem and getting something reported to somebody who can do something about it. And to the extent that we can, make some sort of legal safe harbor, I think is a good plan to the extent we can manage. And I see both Jonathan and Croak, so I will be quiet.
Finding the unmute button. I have it. My brain's come back. On the topic of safe harbor, your concerns about actors behaving in such a way that they are using like vulnerability disclosure as a guise for negative activity is
this is not theoretical, it's already happening.
No. I do recognize that it has happened. I just want to put it out there that the simplest thing for a security researcher to do is nothing. Like the least legal risk they assume is to do nothing. If they want to see it get fixed, and the second safest thing for them to do is anonymously drop it on Pastebin or something like that, right? Like there is just like from a legal risk perspective, right? If you want to see a vulnerability fixed and you don't want to have it associated with you, doing so anonymously is a valid way of doing this work. That being said, so that's like the base that we're working from. So in the safe harbor language that we're crafting, we have to be sure that we are not setting a set of constraints that like you have to follow these rules exactly, or safe harbor doesn't apply. Right. And that's if you read a lot of safe harbor documents and a lot of the things that legal companies put out there, it's you must follow all of these rules. if you don't follow these rules to the letter, if you go outside the scope of these rules, if you disclose in a way that we don't agree with, or if you do these things in some way that's not compatible, safe harbor does not apply to you. And that is a risk, and something that some people don't choose to engage in because of that, because those guardrails that legal is setting up still exposes the researcher to risk.
Right. That's a great point. And I totally agree with you, Jonathan. So you know what? Here's what I would do. So I agree with you that we do need to prevent that, and I also agree that we need safe harbor. I proposed a removal of some safe harbor text from the draft OpenSSF text based on legal to at least have something that could be gotten out the door. But I would like to see much better. And I think that's something we absolutely can and should do. So Jonathan, I'm going to invite you to try to work with our legal folks specifically to try to make sure that that happens.
I'd rather do that on a call than the long form, like back and forth in their legal jury, yada, yada, yada. But yeah, if we can get on a call, that'd be better for me. But yes, I would be happy to engage in that.
Excellent. That's what I'm looking for. I don't care about the format. I'm looking for the making sure, because I agree with you. That's important. And by the way, I think we can totally do that. I think we can say that, hey, the goal here is to not help the attackers, but to help the defenders, and work from there. So I think that's totally doable. And yes, I completely agree. That's important.
So as this moves forward, David, as Ollie pointed out, part of your challenge is going to be communications and getting the word out. When this moves forward, feel free to reach out to me, since that is my day job. I am glad to assist in kind of figuring out a comms plan and thinking up some ways we can get the word out to the different LF projects to help encourage awareness and participation. And now I would like to transition to Luigi's topic, which is, again, related. It's about a reporting policy, but this one is specific to the OpenSSF. And remember, everybody, go ahead.
Before moving to the next point, I think we should summarize and say that we, as a group, I don't hear anyone opposing the proposal by David here, that to summarize that we're very much like it and would like to cooperate in the future, right? Agreed.
And if we have future comments, we have our Slack channel, we have our mailing list. We also have this document you can @ people at. So let's keep that conversation going. And David, maybe you can come back in a meeting or two and kind of give us an update on how it's going.
Love to. And I think transitioning to the inbound security policy is a pretty good one, because what I'm talking about would link to what Luigi's about to talk about eventually.
So Luigi, you now have the floor, sir.
Sorry, can you repeat the last sentence?
We would like to talk about your item in the agenda, the OpenSSF inbound policy, please.
Well, technically, I wanted to have an update about the safe harbor. We have discussed about this in the last, 20 minutes, I guess. About the inbound security policy, the updates are that yesterday I presented to the TAC again to have a feedback and a sort of approval. And sorry for the noise in the background. Really, we need to agree about the safe harbor. Honestly, I would prefer to have a first version that have a safe harbor. And if this means to wait 2 weeks, 1 month, we can wait 2 weeks, 1 month. And I don't think it is a problem. At the same time, I know that Linux Foundation is working on similar policy, and maybe we want to be aligned with the Linux Foundation, but this is an internal problem. So I think, David, correct me if I'm wrong, but we can stay in touch with the Linux Foundation Council and see if we can be aligned to publish our policy and their own policy. But from my perspective, the policy is more or less ready. I am collecting comments at the moment, and except for the safe harbor, I think that we agree on the scope list. We know that at the moment we don't have the PGP key. It is on the roadmap, but I don't think it is so crucial to have it for the first implementation, even if I can understand why people want to communicate using PGP. at the moment we want just to implement a security policy, have a document and have a way for the security community, for the security researcher to report has vulnerabilities. But in the future, if we agree on how we want to share secret in OpenSSF, we can also introduce a PGP without no particular issue, I guess.
I would avoid well, I mean, you're talking about PGP for emails, or are you talking about it for the GitHub or for private vulnerability reporting, like the GitHub private vulnerability reporting?
Well, technically it should be for the email.
Yeah.
Because if we define a procedure, to share secret in OpenSSF, we can give a PGP to every project or maintainer of project. It's not a problem. The main issue that I see at the moment is that we don't have a standard way to share secret like a PGP, and it's very easy to lose them, or I am very good to lose them. So without a password or organization password manager or similar approach, I don't see an easy way to have a PGP for
I don't know how much value. I mean, I think that if somebody asks for a PGP key, like we can have like an individual send them a PGP key to like have them communicate to that individual should we choose. But like ultimately, I don't necessarily. I had a conversation with somebody about a PGP key before, and the line that he said to me was, "I don't want to talk to anybody who wants to use or needs to use PGP to communicate with." Like, yeah, I don't like, and you know, that's a strong opinion, I know, maybe for some people, but I honestly don't see it as a massive blocker in any capacity.
If the goal,
I don't think that the PGP.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. No, I don't think that the PGP is a blocker for the first version, and we need to decide if we want to have it. The point is that there are, and usually researchers don't use the PGP, from my own experience, to communicate a report. But maybe there are some good reason to use it that we don't see at the moment, and we want to have it. I don't know, but not a blocker for the first version for sure.
David.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody wants to make PGP available, sure, but I mean, we've had decades to try to make PGP usable. It hasn't worked. There's no evidence it will ever work. I don't recommend PGP at all. If the goal is to encrypt the emails, may I suggest something called MTA-STS and similar? They're built in now. They do hop-to-hop encryption. You're already using it. All your emails are encrypted. What's the issue? You're solving the wrong, I would say you're solving the wrong problem. And if you're worried about nation states, PGP is not going to help you as much as you think.
Don't send a security email to the ASF then. Their emails are not encrypted. Last I checked.
I'm sorry?
Last I checked, the Apache Software Foundation emails are not encrypted in SLIDE.
Well, I don't know about ASF specifically, but But basically, increasingly, the email systems are all supporting hop-to-hop encryption using either Start TLS or MTA-STS, which mean and the last hop IMAP, you use encrypted IMAP. So IMAP with TLS, and so yes, it's hop-to-hop. It's not end-to-end, but it's encrypted on each stage, and for most folks, that's good enough. And more importantly, they don't have to figure out how to use a clunky tool that's too hard to use. And I think that's more important.
But
information.
Yeah,
information's hard.
But I agree with you in general. The point is that PGP is still a sort of standard. I can understand why. And it is, for example, a voice in the security.txt, and it is in a lot of security policy. Maybe in some countries in the world, you want to encrypt your text data, but at the same time, I can understand why we don't want to start with a PGP, and I am not asking this. Just that it is sometimes people want to at least to see it, even if they don't use it, and this is the main reason why I'm not so I don't think it is a blocker, because if people the people in community really use PGP, we can think to implement it. But at the moment, from my own experience, if you give a platform to send reports or just an email, usually people send an email and it's enough. So that is not a blocker, just a point that maybe we want to discuss again, but without no rush or something similar. So this is my opinion.
I like Luigi's approach that PGP will be addressed in the future. It's not a blocker today, but just so everyone is aware, PGP is a thing that a lot of people still use, regardless of its ease of implementation. So that is something I think we should consider as an option, because we don't want to exclude any researcher or anyone within the community that prefers that method. So to make it an option in the future, and I like the fact that it's not part of the 1.0 release. Any other conversations about the OpenSSF inbound policy? And again, please comment on the document. We can talk in Slack. We have a lot. Let's continue this conversation if we don't have any further comments today.
Just thank you.
Yeah. Thank you to both of you. I think this is important work we need to get rolling forward on. Great. We have 20 minutes left. I will divide the time between Jonathan and Mr. Scovetta. Can you get your item completed in under 10 minutes, Jonathan?
I don't know. If not, we're going to have another odd Open Source Security Foundation Vulnerability Disclosure Working Group meeting on a non-standard Wednesday, if that's what it comes to.
I only need like 90 seconds, so take all the time you want, Jonathan.
Okay. So we have the response from. We've talked about for those who have not been at a lot of these meetings. Luigi's working on, and David Wheeler are discussing inbound vulnerability reporting policies for Alpha Omega and the Open Source Security Foundation. There is also, predominantly within Alpha Omega, the concept of vulnerabilities that are getting reported outbound. And so this is the policy for, fine, David. Yeah, okay. So this is for the outbound vulnerabilities being reported. This has been run by legal Mike Dolan, and he has red penned it. And I want to go through his feedback, and I was hoping to do that in this meeting with people live. Does that seem like fine, Krobe? Perfect, great. I've reviewed some of his feedback, and the biggest concern that I had is that it takes this document that was more easygoing and turns it into a little bit more legalese. That's like my high level concern. But I also see it as like the intention of renaming things, like, using proper nouns to define things, right? Like the time limit, right? So it no longer reads, in my opinion, as what humans would read, but more what lawyers would read. And it's not really my intention, especially given that this is not necessarily intended to be a legal document. It's intended to be a policy for, this is how we will do things. And those things are flexible. But like, these are the guidelines under which we will operate with.
Just so you're aware, within organizations, capital P policy has certain meanings, and that I feel is very appropriate for legal's feedback. Now, if you want to convert this to a process, that would be less stringent potentially.
Well, so the policy is this is a policy. The process is, like, I don't want to build a process document, because the process is like, in my mind, more like prescriptive of a flow of things, how things will occur. right? And this is more like, this is how we will do things. I don't know, Brian, have better insights. Brian Bellendorf, you have better insights into this and LF's legal perspective. Do you want to share anything here?
Just that what can come across as legalese is sometimes also referred to as precision. And I wouldn't. I appreciate wanting to come up with a policy that feels approachable, that feels very pro hacker, we want to do the right thing for everybody, and comes across well. At the same time, if this is a standard we're being asked to hold ourselves to, right, and hold ourselves to others, I think being precise, using standardized terminology makes sense. And as Krubb says, there's other stuff you can hang off this, like the definition of a process, an easy ingest, here's a form for submit, that is the more approachable side of it. So I worry less about the legalese. I don't want to be insensitive, though, to your concerns, because you've touched a lot more researchers and developers on these topics than I have. So that's all I can add. I just will note, when something is published as a policy document, it's going to need it's something that legal is comfortable with, and so I would be inclined to accept Mike's comments unless you felt like there was something dramatically wrong with them.
All right. So from the perspective of someone who's reading this document with the legal changes, and you are receiving a vulnerability report from the Linux Foundation or from the Open Source Security Foundation, right? Does the legalese or the precision and the less kind of gentleness to it come across as aggressive to a maintainer who's reading this for the first time? Krubb, you got your hand up.
I do. I have written corporate policy for 25 years for law firms, insurance companies, and an organization that sold free software. In my current position, I work with lawyers every hour of every day. So from my perspective, what Mike is suggesting is very common, actually what I would expect. This looks like kind of suggestions I've seen on every other kind of policy type document I've seen throughout my life. So I don't personally see anything objectionable doing a quick skim. But again, the perspective of a security researcher is a little different than mine. My main background is enterprises, and this all makes sense to me. I see exactly where Mike is coming from on these statements. And again, it's the real reason behind his comments is precision, because a capital P policy is a thing that the foundation can be held accountable to, and he wants to make sure that everybody is equally represented and protected. And otherwise, let's not call it a policy and do something else. But if you want to make it a policy that is a legal-ish, legal adjacent document, that then there are some expectations in the world on. But what his comments to me seem very reasonable.
Right. Anybody else?
Would it be possible to have a partner document with the policy that is just a procedure and notes guide to kind of help people understand what the different things are from a what they need to do standpoint that is separate than the policy, and explain why they're different?
Yeah, that's an excellent suggestion, Nicole. You have alternative documents. You could write a blog saying, hey, look at this awesome thing we're doing, and then you could use more layperson language. It's just depending on targeting that specific audience you're reaching out to. But capital P policy has certain meanings.
Okay. All right. So I will go through these and review and accept most of them, and then we can take I think that I will throw up another meeting next Wednesday in this same slot, as there's not any other working group meetings in this slot next week. There is not. To make a final pass of this document and see if there's anything else, and then hopefully we can hopefully after LF has reviewed it, or LF Legal has, we'll give them a chance to re-review it before that meeting, and then we can pass it off to the TAC after that. So does anybody after this meeting want to pop on a call and go through these review points more directly, immediately, one-on-one?
I have a public policy meeting I have to attend after this call, so I can't, but everyone else is welcome to. And we could even keep this bridge open afterwards if you want.
Yeah, all right. I will hang out in this call afterwards if we can drop the recording potential. I don't care if we keep it.
I don't have the button to turn it off.
That's fine. It's not important. Okay. All right. Michael Scovetta, over to you. Unless anybody has any more points they want to add to the group about this topic before we.
No. I want to say thank you for doing this, Jonathan. I think it's important. And again, great work.
Yeah. I'm going to have gray hairs.
It's nice to have hair, man.
I know.
We
all right, let's go ahead and go for it.
Awesome.
Let me drop screen.
Cool. So I had a quick one, which is actually as part of some of these conversations on AutoFix and how do we find the maintainers, and it's like, oh well, it's somewhere in the text of a security MD that you have to read, and that works well once. It doesn't work well when you have 1,000 of these, just the fact that there is actually no standard, like there's like 37 different standards, so obviously we need a 38th. But I figured, why not just have a script, because like looking for this stuff isn't actually like magic. So can we just like point at a repo or point at a package and do our best to pull out all the different ways that vulnerabilities, like all the different ways that we know that vulnerabilities could be expressed as a, in a security MD or private vulnerability reporting or Tidelift or whatever, and like do that for the person. For the researcher, in which case you just say like, boom, npm left pen. It's like, here's the contact. It's an email. Sorry, and then you can do whatever you want with it after that. So proof of concept. I wrote. I'm very happy to just give that to OpenSSF or whatever. It shouldn't be maintained by like me personally. I'm hoping that by next week it's like packaged as a just a pip install thing. Right now it's a couple different ecosystems that leverages libraries.io. I think I'm going to add deps.dev since they just released an API, and then it'll crawl through GitHub and look for security MDs in different directories, and it all sorts of stuff like that. So does this seem like a terrible idea to anybody that like we should not be doing, or that someone has already done and it's like, if I would have just looked harder, I would have found?
For traditional vendors, Mike, there have been a couple efforts from First to do something similar.
Okay.
Now that's not going to be applicable to like upstream, but anything that's managed by a vendor, there would be, I can't recall, I can look it up. Yeah. But basically it's a similar idea, like a security.txt file on a web page that would have all this short information, like to report something, call blah. So I think it's a fine idea. And if the group likes it, it's something, again, we can kind of endorse as a preferred standard and see if we can influence the community to start adopting something similar as they're adding their security MDs too.
Yep.
Luigi.
Honestly, I like this kind of idea because at the moment, there is no standard. The security MD is written definitely a human way, but there is sometimes it's verbal, sometimes it's not verbal or greppable. And I think that it can help. Of course, maybe not something that is used to automate a tool that scans the entire internet like npm, because we don't want to cause an outage, but the tool is definitely something that can help the researcher and not only. And it is interesting because security insights would like to solve a similar issue where company, project, people have different standards. Sometimes they have documents, but you don't know where they have. So I think it is a very good way to proceed, and I like it because I mean I invest time sometimes to find the right contact to write to maintainers, and if they don't have a security.md, but maybe they have other documents that are not linked in the repo, yeah, you need to look for them, and yeah, so cool. I agree with Michael.
Awesome, and we can also add kind of like we could have a list of like known places where like we actually know the contact, but it's not discoverable. And we can kind of whatever, embed that as a text file or something and just try to keep it up to date to override cases where like we literally can't do any better purely from a tool. Cool, awesome.
Any other feedback?
If you guys do have feedback after this, just open up an issue against the repo. Once we move it over to OSSF, I'll move report or whatever. But
not related to like finding. I mean, just more industry related. But there's security.txt, which is an RFC standard. Yeah, that's the other one. I spoke with Madison about this topic in the past about trying to parse security.md files. The problem is that like if you're trying to automate vulnerability fixing at scale, or you're trying to automate vulnerability reporting at scale, and maintainers are really negative on reporting at scale because they think that the reporting at scale is just usually low quality FUD in their experience. When you're trying to do stuff like that at scale, like especially when you're dealing with like multiple different Jira instances, and Jenkins has their own Jira instance, Apache Software Foundation has their own Jira instance. If you're trying to report to all these different projects at scale, you have to create logins for every single one, and then you're suddenly dealing with having to automate creating logins and stuff like that, and it's diminishing returns, right? Like it's
totally agree. Yeah. I may have not looked hard enough and in the right representative places, but in every place that I found a contact, it's been it's been email or like a web form. So I haven't had the case where someone said the only way to report this is to create a Jira instance for security issues. For regular bugs, I've seen that a lot, but for security, there's usually a shortcut. Obviously, if we have to create accounts, that's bad, and I
think Jenkins says please report it to our Jenkins with the tag security, and I think that the other one is right HackerOne and BugCrowd. When you involve those, I don't think there's any way to automate reporting across those platforms. I don't know, maybe there is.
Let's reach out to them if there isn't.
Well, I think the reason they don't offer an API for reporters is they don't want to deal. They again are dealing with spam problems and like a lot of people trying to make money off of companies. Yeah. Yep. Noah?
I was going to mention the same thing. In my experience, having to do mass reportings. A lot of companies will just outsource it to HackerOne or something similar, and it does create a roadblock, but an audit trail, which David said is not a requirement to have an audit trail.
Yep.
I was going to add my 2 cents to that.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like we'll see in practice. So if we have 1,000 vulnerabilities to report and we can get 800 of them done through easy means, and there's 200 that we have to like manually do the thing. Well, it's better than doing it for 200 than 1,000. And we just know that that's like the pain of reporting stuff. We give it a shot.
If I could just jump in here real quick, I think, being at HackerOne, you never address a situation until all of a sudden it's here. And so I think the idea of mass vulnerability report, high quality vulnerability reporting, we're talking about it because it's up and coming. So maybe that's something that could be discussed, Michael. Like if you want to reach out, or if anyone else wants to reach out, about, how can we make this easier in mass for groups who are trying to do this productively. I'm sure that's something that we would definitely like to be a part of that conversation, how to make it easier. So I'll just throw myself out there as a contact for that.
I appreciate that. That's awesome.
I mean, I would encourage you, if you have the time, join the AutoFix SIG meeting groups too, which are again every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Every other Wednesday, because that is an area that we're discussing. Our plan for the future moving forward for most organizations is to, at this time, encourage them to enable GitHub's private vulnerability reporting, which now has an API to let us report via. But I know that that doesn't plug into a lot of corporate disclosure programs. And so if there is a way we could do this with HackerOne or something like that, the biggest concern that I have is that when you go to HackerOne or you go via disclosing that way, a lot of those companies have, even in their public disclosure policies, terminology that restricts how you're allowed to disclose a vulnerability and whether or not you can, like, they basically waive safe harbor if you disclose in a way that, like, if you want to disclose a vulnerability, a lot of them state like you can only disclose with permission and stuff like that. And so if we would, I don't think that as a group we would be willing or able to accept that terminology carte blanche, right, without a carve out that, hey, the work that's being performed under this is known to not going to be disclosed, and companies that are accepting that have to be aware of that and accept that.
We are at the top of the hour. Luigi, you get the last word before we adjourn.
No, I want just to say that HackerOne can be not the right example sometimes because there are private company and vulnerability are on the infrastructure, and we are talking about open source, so probably the policy are less strict. I know that some company want to have the control also on the open source project and the disclosure about the open source project, but maybe we are just lucky. I don't know. I think Jonathan has a bit.
Yeah, the policies tend to be for the infrastructure, and then they also add open source in scope, maybe, and then it just becomes something that's very overly restrictive because they're talking about their infrastructure, and it's a toss in afterwards, and it's like this world of no disclosure does not work for open source when you're publishing stuff, right? It needs to be a CVE.
David, do you have the ability to turn off the recording so Jonathan can continue potentially the conversation? I didn't log in with the ops grid.
It's fine. We don't need to turn it off.
I do. I have that. I have very few superpowers, but that's one. But I have another meeting, so I'm going to be. I'm going to turn it off now, if that's okay, everybody, because it's no longer that meeting. It's a breakout, and I'm going to let Jonathan, I guess, be lead on this.
Yeah, come hang out with me. I'm fun. I promise.
All right, everyone. Thank you for a great conversation today. Cheers.